Hello, I'm Terry Butchie from Ohio State University's Math Literacy Initiative, and today we're going to talk about equal shares. This is for grade 1, and this is when the students really kind of start to talk about fractional ideas. So it's really like setting the groundwork for the other ideas or other work with fractions. There are fraction components in each grade level going all the way up. But what we want to do in first grade is really just acclimate your student or your child to really understanding this idea of an equal share and what that equal share idea means, which is a big piece of fractions. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the standard. So if you look, this is an Ohio standard. There are very similar standards in all states. But let's just break this standard down a little bit so that you can better understand what they mean. So partition circles and rectangles into 2 and 4 equal shares. So that's the first piece. We need to focus on both circles and rectangles. And then we're going to look at it in terms of 2 and 4 equal shares. All right. Describe the shares using words, halves, fourths, and quarters. And use the phrase half of, a fourth of, a quarter of. So that's the terminology, the verbiage. Now you don't want to get into this terminology piece until you've done some work with your students, because we need them to understand what it means in their terms first. So I wouldn't introduce these terms right away until they start calling them something, and then you can talk about the common words that we would use. Describe the whole as 2 of. So what that means is when you have a whole piece, we can talk about the 2 of. We'll do that in just a minute. And then here's the biggie. This is a really big component for your first graders. So understand for these examples that decomposing, that means looking at it, the circles and the rectangles put together and decomposed, taken apart. So decomposing into more equal shares creates a smaller share. Now you sure don't want to go up to your student or your child and say, did you know that decomposing into more shares makes it a smaller share? Like, you don't want to just tell them that. You want them to figure it out on their own. Like, which one would be more? When do you get more of a piece? So let's go through this standard then with an actual activity. So I have some squares or some rectangles and some circles. So I have some circles here, some rectangles. Here's another rectangle, and then we have some small circles. Excuse me. I'm going to put this piece of red paper so that you can see. So let's look at this. So remember that our standard that we got, and you can find your standard at your Department of Education, whatever state you're in. Go to your Department of Education and look up the math standards. Those are all accessible to parents and teachers, everyone. So you can look and see what it is that your child is supposed to be doing. So, and this is a good thing for a first grader too. So if you want to trace, ask your child if they would like to find some circles and some things that have square sides and circle sides in the house. That's a good activity for your student to do, your child. So go around the house, find some things that they can trace on, and then cut them out themselves. They're the mathematicians. Let them do that work. So they've found some circles and they've found some rectangles around the house, and they've traced them, and then they cut them out. So the teacher is the facilitator. So in this case, you're the teacher now. So let the students do this work. It helps them for their understanding. So they've cut out our rectangles and our squares. Now let's talk about this first piece of the standard. So remember, the first piece of the standard says that we want to cut partition circles and rectangles into 2 and 4 equal shares. So the first question could be, how can I take this rectangle? I'm going to use this one right first. This is a question to your student, your child. How can I take this rectangle and make 2 equal shares. How could I do that? So, and you pause. Don't tell them right away. Just pause. What could I do to make 2 equal shares? And so let's say your student says fold it. It's a good idea. So sometimes you can do what's called a non-example. So let's say your student says, well, you just fold it and then it'll become 2 equal pairs. Now this isn't tricking your student, it's just getting them to be a little more clear on them giving you your directions. So you could say, okay, I'm going to fold it. So now, I'm going to use my spaghetti here to mark it. So now, are they in 2 equal shares? And they'll look at you and they'll say, silly, that is silly. No, of course they're not. And so then you say, okay, well, tell me what to do then so I can do it the way you want me to, or you do it. You have them show you. So then they'll understand. They'll say, well, let's fold it. And they may even use the word half, because half is a pretty common word just in the general public. So they may understand half already. Like you might, a lot of times when we're dishing out food or dinner or whatever, there's halves and quarters. So now you can say, oh, okay, so we folded it into 2 parts, but it's a certain special kind of fold. It's a fold right down that center so that they match up. See how these match up right like that? So here we have folded this into 2 equal shares. This is our fair share for the rectangle. So I'm going to, again, we have this here. So remember, we have these 2 pieces. We've proved that they're exactly the same because we folded them. So now we have this and it's folded. So we have 1 rectangle that's folded into halves. Now remember, our standard says that we want to partition circles and rectangles in 2 and 4 equal shares. So you could also take this exact same shape, this exact same size, and fold it and say, can you make that into a half again? And you want to ask them like you don't know what you're doing and they're showing you. So can you fold that for me again? I want to see how you did that again. They'll fold it up and they'll be soupsy-doops proud that you want to see them do it. And then say, well, what if we wanted this and we wanted to make it into 4 equal pieces? And you just stop and you don't say anything. And you say, what do you think we could do? And then you want them to play with it. And they might say, fold it again. So you could say, okay, can I fold it here? And they'll say, oh, no. Fold it so that it flaps down. So, and whatever word they use, you keep using that word. So if they say flap down, use flap down. So now we have this into 4 equal pieces. How can we prove that they're equal? Well, they cover each other. So that area of each of them cover each other. And so it's exact same size. So now we have a rectangle into 2 equal parts and a rectangle into 4 equal parts. Now you want to do the same thing with circles. So 2 equal parts. I'm doing this really fast. You don't do it this fast with your student. Again, you question. How could we make this circle split into 2 equal parts? Well, and they'll say to fold it, and that's keep asking and questioning, and then say, okay, well, what can we do about finding fourths? What do you think we should do? And again, just keep going through the asking and the playing part with them. So I'm going to go ahead and just make our 4s right now. So we have our 4s here, and I have some halves here. So I'm going to move my materials off to the side. So now we have our half. I'm going to mark this down. Our 4s. I'm just going to mark it just so you can see it better. Our 4s on here. And our halves on here. All right, so let's look back at our standards again. So again, it says partition circles and rectangles in 2 and 4 equal shares. So we've done that. Now that doesn't mean do it as fast as we do it. You do it for at least a day. Let's find a bunch of rectangles, find a bunch of circles, and let's partition them. You don't use that word probably with a student, but let's share them equally so that we have, if you wanted to share it with two people, or if you wanted to 4 people to share it. So that's this first piece. Describe the shares using words halves, fours, and quarters. Again, skip that part for right now. Use whatever term your child is using for that right now. Describe the whole as 2 of or 4 of the share. So there's a way that you can look at this as from the whole and from the parts. So if we wanted to describe this whole circle, we could describe it as saying that it has two, the number 2 is an important piece, 2 equal parts. So this circle has 2 equal parts. There's a difference between saying this circle has 2 equal parts and saying this part is one of those 2 pieces. Those are kind of some of the, so we're adults. We've worked with fractions before. Students haven't. So there's a difference between looking at it as the whole and saying how many equal parts are there? There are 2. And then looking at the whole and saying, okay, I just want this piece. What is that called? Well, it's 1 out of those 2. So these are the kinds of things that kind of trip kids up with fractions. We're taking numbers that they're used to seeing as whole numbers, and now we're saying, okay, well, there's another way to use this number too, and that's in fractions. And that's why fractions are both an incredibly pivotal part of mathematics, but also something that can cause a great deal of discomfort and confusion. So we want to make sure that we play with your kids using fractions so that they can actually see these ideas. So now we've talked about the fact that so remember, you want to go both directions with your students. One is create equal shares, and then the other is talk about the whole in terms of how many equal shares there are, okay? So equal shares and how many shares there are. So don't scooch right into that fraction notation. We don't want to scooch right into the fraction notation. It's too confusing for students right now because they're really just learning the foundational whole number idea. So really what we're asking is what do we call these things? We're not asking them to do any combining or anything like that. Just what do we call them? And the other thing that we want to talk about when you're working with your students is not only what do we call them, but why do we call them that? So in first grade, we're only talking about halves and fours. So we can focus on this idea. Now, for the last part of our standard, so this last part of the standard is understand for these examples that decomposing into more equal shares creates smaller shares. So when we take these wholes, which in this case were our rectangles or circles, what we really want our students to understand in this part is that if you have a whole, any shaped whole, so I'm going to pick this whole, and we split it into 2 equal parts. There's our 2 equal parts. So this is one of those 2 equal parts. What's the difference between that size and if we split it into 4 equal parts? Will it be bigger or smaller? So you want to ask that question first. Will it be bigger or will it be smaller, and why? Always ask your student why. You want your child to be used to having to defend their answer when you ask them a question. So the idea is to get them to understand that the more times we fold this into equal parts, and you don't want to tell them this, you want to ask them, say, okay, can we fold it again? Let's fold it again. And is that going to be a smaller piece or a bigger piece? And you would just be as excited as they are to wait and see what happens, because that's what will bring them into mathematics. There's also always another, food. We use examples of food when we talk about fractions all the time. So I'm going to take this. I made pizzelles this weekend. my mother-in-law taught me how to make pizzelles. It's an Italian anise cookie. Anise is like that black licorice flavor. I just love it. But it's really cool because I have this beautiful pizzelle iron. So you put the dough in and then you squish it down just like a waffle iron, and it makes these cookies. So let me show you. This is a pizzelle. So pizzelles are in a circle form, and they have patterns on both sides. And I like the anise ones. Some people like them with other flavors, but that's not real ones. So the real ones have anise. People either love them or not, or they hate them. So the question could be for your child, if I take this cookie and let's do what we did with the paper. Could I make this into 2 equal shares? What could I do to make it into 2 equal shares? And then you wait. And you let them look at it and figure it out. And you might have like a piece of bologna or something that's a circle or a square, piece of cheese, something that's a circle or a square, that I like using the food because we have a lot of circle square foods. So once we figure that out, then if they say to break it into 2 equal parts, here's 2 equal parts. So here's our 2 equal parts. So here's one pizzelle, that's the whole thing. So we have a whole pizzelle, and here is a whole pizzelle, but broken into 2 equal parts. Okay, now again, we're talking with real things, so there'll be a little bit of it's a little bit off, but really we're just getting to the idea of 2 equal parts. So we have the whole, we have a whole with 2 equal parts that I've split. And then you say, well, we want to split this whole not into 2 equal parts, but into 4 equal parts. What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to get more or less of the cookie if we split it into 4 equal parts? And again, we're adults. We can see this and understand that, but you want your student to grapple with these ideas. That the time that they spend really kind of figuring things out, that's called a point of disequilibrium, where they're kind of thinking about it, but they really are kind of a little unsure too. And that's the sweet spot. That's the sweet spot when they can really learn some things, when they're right on that edge of being a little confused, not over the edge, that's going too far, but just a smidge confused, but still in the running, like still really working and participating. So, well, let's just look. So if we split this into, hopefully it'll split nicely. Yep. So split this into 2 more pieces and split this into 2 more pieces. Now we have our whole that's split into 4 pieces. So which one of those would give you the most? Is it if we split it into a half? So here we have our half. Well, we get it. I guess it depends on if you like the cookie or not, which one you'd want. If you want a 1/4 or a half. If you like the cookie, like me, you'd want a half because that's a bigger piece. If you don't like the cookie, you might, and you have to taste it just to be adventurous with your food, then you might want a 1/4. But this kind of conversation about what happens when we keep splitting it up into more and more pieces are those pieces going to get bigger or smaller? Here's why this is important. When we split something up into more, they hear that word more equal shares. More, a lot of times in math means that it's getting bigger. But in this case, this is why we have to be real careful about how we talk about this. In this case, more means more equal pieces. So every time it's going to get split up again and again. And that's the thing that you want your student to understand. Because the idea of number getting bigger or more means bigger usually. And in this case, it makes the pieces smaller. So we're breaking them up into more parts, but each of those parts get increasingly smaller when we break them up. Now you might even want to do a challenge if you have your 1st grade child and they're here, and you could say, what do you think would happen if we broke it into 8 pieces? Do you think those pieces will be smaller or bigger than the 4 pieces? And then just let them try it. So, playing with math, tactile experiences with math, really just having conversations. Don't get all stuck into the verbiage, the words that you use at the beginning. We're just really playing with these ideas. What your teacher and throughout the grade level, they're going to start to use these ideas of halves and fourths and quarters. You can throw them in there. Just don't get real insistent about it at the very beginning. You don't want them to think that math is just about vocabulary. It's not. The vocabulary is, we'll get to the vocabulary after we understand the premise of the idea or the concept. So thanks for playing with me with equal shares. I'm going to enjoy my pizza, and hopefully you'll be back again on a Monday Math Day. If you have any other questions that you would like some ideas on, please let us know on Facebook and on Instagram. Today at 1 o'clock, we're going to be doing graphing quadratics using the vertex. And then later on today at 2 o'clock, we'll be doing multiplication with fifth graders, multiplication of fractions for fifth graders. So hope to see you. Thanks for joining us.